Yeah. Has anyone ever done something to you that is so vile that every time you think about it, it just makes your blood boil and you know it's against Jesus, but you just want to get revenge? Well, that's what today's story's about. It's June of 1954 in the Bắc Ninh province of Vietnam. By this stage, the French had been locked in a war with the Viet Minh for like 8 years. Basically, the Viet Minh are like freedom fighters that are trying to get the French colonizers out of there. And for context, this is the Indochina War. This is not the Vietnam War where the US was involved that everybody thinks about. This is like before then. Now, the French have two armies, the normal French military and a mercenary army called the French Foreign Legion. And when a war isn't going very well, the French rulers will send the French Foreign Legion over to these wars to die, and that way, you know, French citizens aren't getting killed and the population isn't going to be up in arms. And that was very much the situation in the Indochina War. The French were getting their butts kicked in Vietnam, and the bodies just started to stack up, and they were being shipped back to mainland France like every single day. And one such casualty was a dude named Stan. Now, Stan was originally from Romania. He was in his mid to late 40s at this stage. And Stan was a corporal in the French Foreign Legion, so he was a guy who had some rank. And he would actually lead a small group of men into battle. It was while Stan was leading this patrol in Bắc Ninh, a place called Route 18, which was like a huge road that ran really far that the French were using to resupply their soldiers with stuff like food, ammunition, stuff like that. And the Viet Minh knew this, so they would constantly attack Route 18 to try and disrupt the French's resupplying of their soldiers on the front line. And it was on this particular morning that Stan and his men were making sure that there were no enemy soldiers near Route 18 when all of a sudden bullets started flying overhead. Stan and his men hit the deck. They've just been ambushed and they're scurrying to get behind anything to get out of the way of this gunfire. And at this stage, the men are somewhat separated. They are somewhat still close together, but because of how the ground is, a few of the men are taking cover behind like a massive fallen down tree. There's another one behind rocks. There's some behind dirt mounds. So they can't really see one another very well. But nonetheless, they come up with this direct action plan, I guess you would call it, to fire back at the enemy because they know they need to get out of here. And Stan gives the orders for them to throw smoke grenades, which is providing a little bit of cover. There are other soldiers who are throwing live grenades towards where these muzzle flashes are coming from this dense bush. So as these grenades are exploding and dirt and bits of tree bark are flying everywhere, one of the soldiers is firing at the enemy while another guy moves, and then he'll take cover and then he'll start firing down and then he will move. And what their aim is to gradually make their way out of this kill zone area. Because at this point, they all know if they stay here, they're all going to die. After several minutes, the soldiers make it out of the area and the gunfire starts to die down. And it eventually stops. They've gotten far enough back at this point that the Viet Minh soldiers, the enemy, have just retreated back into the bush because that's how guerrilla warfare works, is they will hit their targets and then they'll get out of there before reinforcements come. The Legionnaires are still somewhat scattered at this point, but they are slowly converging into one area because they do need to conduct a post-action assessment of the situation. Are there any injuries? Do we have ammo? Have we told the command, this is what's happened? Because ambushes like this don't happen all the time, so they need to tell the commander, hey, there are enemy soldiers in this area, and this is what's happened. So the soldiers are sort of in a bit of a protective position. You'll have a couple of guys up front, and they'll be watching out the front. There'll be a guy over there, he'll be watching the left, the guy over there's watching the right, and there'll be people behind watching the rear, just to make sure that they can't be crept up on by the enemy, just in case they're still out there. And at this point, they notice a few people missing. They're like, where is our corporal Stan? And one of the guys is like, I could hear him telling us to pull back. And then after a few explosions, I didn't hear him anymore. It's at this point that they hear a French voice say, don't shoot, friendly, coming to you. After a few seconds, they see the new guy, Ellie, and he's dragging Stan behind him. He enters the perimeter and he drops Stan down and he just falls into a heap in full exhaustion because he's just dragged their corporal out of this gunfight for hundreds of yards, and he's just completely exhausted. He's firing back and he's trying to drag the corporal out of there, and he's shooting back and he's ducking for cover, and he finally gets to the group and he is just completely exhausted. He's spent all of his energy just doing that. And all the soldiers are looking at Ellie, and their eyes are super wide. They're looking at Ellie, they're looking at Stan, because they can see that Stan, he is already dead. Now, back at base camp, the commander is talking to Ellie and he's asking him what happened. And he tells him, after the ambush, Stan and I were starting to pull back. I was covering him, he was covering me, and then all of a sudden he just gets hit. And I didn't want to just leave him there, so I grabbed him and I dragged him out of there. And the commander is like super, super impressed. And he's like, you know what? Like, I'm glad it's a tragic event. I'm glad, though, that you pulled Stan out of there and you didn't let his body get taken by the enemy, because that would have been really bad. So he gives him a citation for bravery. Now, Ellie, he's a young guy. He's only 22 years old. He's this tall, really handsome guy. And he had only just recently arrived in Vietnam. He hadn't even been in the French Foreign Legion that long. And by this stage, after what he did, he'd earned the respect of all these battle-hardened veterans. Guys who at this point had been through the thick of it. But Ellie wasn't exactly telling the truth. And unbeknown to everyone, the details of who Ellie actually was and the chain of events that led up to him joining the French Foreign Legion and being in this exact moment at this exact time were darker and more disturbing than anyone could ever imagine. But for that, we need to take a trip back to 1924. In Germany, a 35-year-old decorated former soldier would pen a book called Mein Kampf, which in English means My Struggle. And the author is a guy named Adolf Hitler. And he really doesn't like Jewish people. I mean, really doesn't like them. And although Adolf is of Austrian descent, he somehow becomes the president of Germany. And straight away, he starts enacting laws that negatively affect the Jewish population. And this starts in 1933 when he is elected. First, he bans the Jews as working as lawyers, teachers, doctors, and working in any media. And then by 1935, he strips all the Jewish people of their citizenships, effectively making them stateless. And the irony of all of this is Adolf was stateless himself because he renounced his Austrian citizenship and he didn't become German for like 7 years. But now that Adolf is in power and what would lead to the extermination of the Jews, this was a very slow crawl. This was not a run. He would enact smaller, less obvious policies that would lead up to what's about to come. So after making the Jewish people stateless in 1935, by 1938 he's like, you know what? We got to do something about this illegal immigration problem. Completely disregarding the fact that these people were citizens like before, like you literally made them stateless. So he passes this policy to round up all the Jewish people in Germany and put them into concentration camps. And the run-of-the-mill Germans are like somewhat happy with what Adolf's doing because the economy is like booming. It couldn't be better. But what they didn't realize is that Adolf and these people were stealing all of the Jewish people's property, and that was really part of the reason the economy was getting a boost. So he's effectively just stealing stuff. Now, other European countries see this and they're like, that's a great idea. And one of those countries was Romania, and a guy named Ion Antonescu, and he would go on to overthrow the king of Romania. And he effectively became a dictator. And he would have heavy ties with these people called the Iron Guard and the Legion of Archangel Michael, which is such a stupid name. It's like Iron Maiden Slayer Metallica Guard. You know, people were drinking when they came up with that name. It's so dumb. And Eon starts telling the Romanian army and the police to start rounding up Jews in Romania, and let's put them in concentration camps as well, because look at Germany's economy. It is booming. Now, these concentration camps or ghettos were really bad. They are cramped and overcrowded. There's diseases spreading through there. People are dying of starvation. There's a lack of water, so hygiene's really bad. And typhus and tuberculosis is spreading through everyone, and that's a deadly disease if you get it. And the guards that are running these places, most of them were just local dead shits before the war happened. So all of a sudden, you're giving these losers this power over people. You're now in charge of these people, and there's no repercussions for anything that they do. They can beat them, they can grape them, they can even murder them, and nobody's going to say anything. So they abuse their power. And in one particular ghetto in a place called Chinescow, the conditions are particularly nasty. I mean, it is one of the worst. And this is where that soldier from the start of the story, this is where he grew up. He was just 9 years old when his mother, father, and 3 older brothers were taken to this camp. The family is essentially imprisoned in this tiny little room where Eli's father and his brothers are forced to go and work in these like slave labor camps. People are like dropping dead from disease and starvation and exhaustion. And if that wasn't going to kill you, if the conditions of the camp weren't going to kill you, the guards most certainly would. Now, in this camp, there was one particular guard who was extremely nasty to the prisoners. In fact, he was so bad, he would often beat people. He even killed people. And on this particular night, he was drunk and he goes to Eli's parents' little room. And he bangs on the door and tells them to open it up. Now, Eli was told by his mother, whenever the guards are around here, you go and hide under some clothes. I don't want you around. So 9-year-old Eli runs and he hides under the washing basket and he hides there and he can just peep out. He can just see a little bit out. Several guards walk in and this particular one, this really nasty one, just starts beating on Eli's father for no reason. And he's beating him and beating him and beating him, and Eli's father's getting bloody, and even the other guards are like, hey man, maybe leave him, I think he's had enough. And this guard, he just won't stop. He just keeps hitting him, and next thing you know, he's dead. The other guards just leave. They're like, oh God, he's done it again. So this nasty guard, he gets up and he looks directly at Eli's mum, and she's sitting there on the chair with her 3 children. She's got them tucked into her. Eli, at this point, he's still looking out. He can still see what's going on. And the guard walks over to Eli's mother and he grabs the kids and he's beating the 3 boys simultaneously, and he beats them to death. And by this stage, Eli's mother is like almost comatose with shock. And she can't believe she's just watched her husband die. She's just watched her 2 older sons die, and she can't move. And the guard stands up and he looks directly at her and he's covered in blood. His baton's covered in blood and he starts walking towards her. He makes quick work of her before he exits their apartment, leaving the 5 family members dead on the floor. He's laughing hysterically, and Eli can hear this. He can hear this man laughing as he's leaving his room, and the laughter is getting quieter and quieter as he walks off in the distance. Now, in these concentration camps, there are non-Jewish people that live there because they didn't just go and erect new buildings. They took over entire areas, and some people that grew up there and lived there, they didn't want to leave. And there was this Catholic white family that lived there. And one day they would see little 9-year-old Eli out scavenging for food, and they could see that he was extremely malnourished. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days, and they'd seen him a few times before, but on this particular day, they decided to stop and talk to him. Now, this came at a big risk for them because everybody knew that you were not allowed to talk to the prisoners, and if you did, you could get in trouble. You could be arrested or worse. But they see Eli and they can't help it. They look around, they don't see any guards, so they go up to him and they say, hey, are you okay? And Eli responds, no, I'm not. And he tells them what happened to his parents. And the father and the mother look at each other and they say, we have to do something. So they decide then and there that they're going to hide him in their house. Again, this is a great risk to them, but they can't let this little boy die out here like this. So Eli is hiding in these people's houses, and he's really living off scraps of food because they don't even have enough to eat either, but they are keeping him alive. And after several months, this particular camp at Chinescow would actually close down. They'd close the camp down and they'd force all the prisoners to march to another camp called Transnistria, which was like a 16-hour walk away, and most of the prisoners would actually die on this journey. They wouldn't even make it there. Eli is still not out of the woods because the war is still going on, so he still has to remain hidden, and he does so. And it's on August 22nd, 1944, when the Russian Red Army would enter the top of Romania at a place called Jassy in the northeastern part. They would convince the king who had been, remember he'd been dethroned at the start of all this, they convinced him to, hey, let us take over and we'll get rid
of Eon and all these Nazis. So the king's like, yeah, sure. And the USSR, along with the USA and the Allied forces, they would topple the Nazi regimes, and the Jewish people were now free. Eli is only 12 years old at this point. All the Nazi sympathizers, guards, and military people are like fleeing these countries because they know that they're now going to get rounded up. And prosecutions for war crimes too is like the firing squad. And some of these people were like random people. They were like neighbors who just dobbed in their Jewish neighbors, had them round up. Some of them probably did kill people, but you can't get away from that stink if you were involved in anything like that. So they're all just fleeing these countries, these European countries that were Nazis. And from here, Eli, he can't get over what had happened to his parents. And he's only still just a young boy, but he decides to travel from city to city, town to town, and he's looking for this guard. He wants to find this guard that murdered his family. And he does this for a long, long time. And he's living off dumpster diving for food out of bins, and people, the generosity of people who are giving him food so he can survive, and they know what he's up to. He's looking for this guy, and all he remembers his name is Stănescu. He doesn't have a last name for the guy, but he will never forget what this man did to his family. It's like tattooed on his brain. Eventually, he would encounter some older Jewish people who were at the Chernihiv camp, and they remembered Stănescu. They remembered him very well, and they would tell Eli that we believe that he was born, raised, and grew up in this small little village near a place called Chisinau. I'm sorry I'm mispronouncing everything. And this is a huge break for Eli. In all the years he had been traveling and doing what he needed to survive, this was the first big break that he got. Like, he now knows the town Stănescu was actually from, so he starts heading there. It's currently 1947 and Eli is 15 years old, and as he's heading there, he just can't get out of his head like what he's going to do when he finally sees Stănescu and he looks him in the eyes, like he's fantasizing about it. I mean, he can still hear this guard's laughter the night he killed his family back in 1941. So Eli gets to the small town and he starts asking the locals. He says, hey, I'm looking for a guy named Stănescu. We're old friends. And anti-Jewish hostilities are still kind of rife, and they're looking at this kid and they're going, there's no way Stănescu is friends with this kid. He doesn't like Jewish people, and this kid looks Jewish to me. So after a few days, word is spreading around about this young-looking Jewish kid who is asking about Stănescu. And eventually, Stănescu's son, who's roughly the same age as Eli, approaches him and says, why are you looking for my dad? And Eli says, oh, he sticks to the story. We're old friends. And this kid just tells Eli, he says, hey, my dad hasn't been here in years. And Eli believes him, so he just breaks character and says, listen, your piece of trash father killed my parents, and I'm here for revenge. Now, Stănescu's son, he pipes up and says, my dad never did that, and even if he did, you're Jewish. Who cares? This sends Eli over the edge, and he has a backpack with him with a large butcher's knife in it. This was meant for Stănescu, but now this kid, he's going to get it. And Eli stabs him in the stomach and drops him. Eli looks around and sees that people just saw him do it, so he books it out of there. He's running off. The police arrive, and Stănescu's son is dead. They can't revive him. They get eyewitness reports on what Eli looks like, and they're on the search for him now. They eventually find him, arrest him, and charge him, and he is sentenced to 5 years in a juvenile prison. Now, you got to remember where Eli comes from. A juvenile prison to him is like a walk in the park, so he's like a model prisoner, and he eventually gets released when he's only 20 years old. It's 1952, and Eli decides, I'm going to immigrate to this new country that's just been formed called Israel. But because he was convicted of a violent crime and spent time in prison, he has to get the permission from the Romanian authorities and the Israeli authorities. And they look at the case and they go, just go. We don't want him anyway. In Israel, Eli is now trying to find a new normal. Like a lot of Jewish people post-war, they had lost everything, family, friends, their possessions, everything. They were starting from scratch again. And after just a few months of living there, Eli gets conscripted into the new Israeli Defense Force, the IDF. You got to remember that Eli is still only 20 years old, and he's young and he's fit and he's healthy, and they need people that are going to help defend this new country of theirs. In the IDF, he's a standout pretty quickly, and he ends up making the paratroop regiment. He eventually rises to the officer ranks because he's such a standout. And you got to remember that, like, This is moving through very quickly because this defense force has only just newly been formed. They got to get people into these positions. But everything for Eli just seems to be going really well when one day, serendipitously, he's at a local cafe and he overhears an older Jewish couple talking about the Chinesgal ghetto and how they were stuck in there back in the 1940s. So he walks over and he introduces himself and he says, "Hey, I'm Eli and I actually grew up there." Now, people who have been through horrific incidences like that never forget the perpetrators of these crimes. So the conversation eventually does shift back to this barbaric guard named Stănescu. And these people remember him and they're like, he's in the wind, he is gone. And I don't think he's ever going to be coming back because after the war, he fled into France and he joined the French Foreign Legion. We believe he's over in Indochina. They even found out that Stănescu was in the 3rd Foreign Infantry Unit, which again was stationed overseas. So armed with this information, Eli is immediately put back in the same mind frame he was 5 years ago. He can't let this go. At the core of him, he wants revenge. And he knows that Stănescu may in fact be dead already. He may have died in combat, but he's not going to let this go. So he starts hatching a plan. After a few days, he goes to his commanding officer and he tells them that he thinks he would be better suited in the Israeli Navy. And the reason he gives is, he says that my parents always loved the water and I really want to honor their memory by being in the Navy. Now, Eli is a shit hot soldier, so his commanding officer is like, you know what? Granted. And he signs the transfer papers and Eli is now in the Israeli Navy. Eli, a few days later, would board a naval ship in a place called Haifa in Israel, and it was headed for Genoa in Italy. He knows once he gets to Italy, if he crosses the French border, he can join the French Foreign Legion because you have to be in France to join it. And his whole plan is, I'm going to join and then I'm going to track down Stănescu and I'm going to get my revenge. When the ship arrives, Eli asks the commander, the captain of the ship, hey, I'd like to take some leave. I'd like to go and see Genoa and, do some sightseeing and touristy stuff. The captain's like, sure, you've earned it. And he signs the slip and Eli leaves. It's June 6, 1953, and Eli actually crosses over the French border and he's now in Marseille. He's at a French Foreign Legion office and he's signing up there. By this stage, Israel knows he's deserted, and he's deserted during wartime, so there is a warrant out for his arrest. He's in big trouble. I had to get another coffee. This is getting wild. So from here, he ships off to Algeria to do his French Foreign Legion basic training. And again, Eli is a standout, and he actually gets accepted into one rep, which is their paratroop regiment. It's the elite regiment. It's from here, Eli tells his commanding officer, he says, look, I really want to serve. I really want to serve. I want to go to war. I want combat. I want the real thing. So I'd like to be transferred to the infantry unit, which is currently involved in Indochina War. And they are like, are you sure? Because you've got this really cool gig with the elite para regiment. Are you sure you want to go and just be an infantryman? And he's like, I'm sure. And look, hey, I'll get my experience and maybe I'll come back. So his commanding officer really likes Eli and he's like, okay, I'm going to transfer you to the infantry unit. And the commander of the infantry unit is like, we're going to get a one rep guy. We'll take him. So Eli gets on a ship and it's headed to Southeast Asia. The boat ride takes 20 days and the conditions are horrendous. The lower cabins are windowless, so it's stifling hot and the bunks are cramped, so the men are constantly getting in the fights. There's rats. And on top of that, the seas are choppy and it's smashing against the boat and the boat's constantly rocking. So people are constantly getting sick. Seasickness is a real thing. And when they land at a port called Haiphong. It's in the northern part of Vietnam. Now, the conditions on land aren't much better. It is humid. You're constantly covered in sweat and the bush is thick. The jungle's super thick. And there's animals out there that'll kill you. It really is hell. They eventually get to the forward operating base in the Bac Ninh region where Eli will be assigned to his specific unit. And to his amazement, it is 3 REI, and it's the same unit he was told that Stănescu is in. So he may still be here if he's still alive, or maybe he's in another unit, but he's going to chance it. And it's his first day when he's standing in formation when this short man is pacing up and down the line. He's yelling at the men, he's putting them down, he's talking about how they have no discipline. He's the corporal who's in charge of this unit. It's Stan from the opening part of this story. But Stan is Stanescu, and Ellie can see that. It's been 15 years, but he recognizes Stan straight away. He has lost a lot of weight, and now he's in his late 40s, but Ellie knows Stan is Stanescu, because in the French Foreign Legion, people get new identities. So Ellie knows it's him. I mean, there's no doubt. There's absolutely no doubt. And at some point, Stan's tirade leads him towards Ellie, and he's telling people, you're going to be going home in a body bag. And Stan has to look up at Ellie because Ellie towers over him in height. And as he's yelling at Ellie, Ellie can smell the alcohol in his breath, so he knows that not a lot has changed since Romania. This man is still clearly an alcoholic. He dismisses the men, and Ellie realizes that Stan does not recognize him, so he's got nothing but time up his hands to really enact his revenge. And the perfect time would come while they were patrolling Route 18. When the ambush happened, Ellie found himself near Stanescu, who was hiding behind a giant dirt mound. Everybody knew that they were outnumbered and outgunned by the enemy, so the whole point here was they needed to retreat. They needed to retreat as quickly as possible. As the soldiers are providing cover fire and bounding and moving out of there, Ellie and Stan are still up front, and they're out of the view of everybody else. It's in this moment that Ellie knows, I'm going to take my chances here. So he yells up to Stan. He says, hey, Stanescu. Stanescu rolls around and he looks directly at Ellie because he hasn't heard his name called out like that in a very long time. And he's looking at Ellie trying to where do I know this guy from? And this is where Ellie drops the mic on him and says, I was in the Chinescu ghetto. You murdered my family. And before Stanescu can even react, Ellie pumps him with a couple of rounds from his submachine gun. Now from here, Ellie would finish his time in the French Foreign Legion, and he would leave in 1958, and he would actually hand himself into the Israeli embassy in France. And because he deserted during wartime, he was court-martialed and sent back to Israel. It's here that he would sit in prison for almost 2 years before he got a court date. And this is a pretty serious offense. You can be looking at up to 15 years in jail. And when the judge hears Ellie's story, he decides that the charge is going to be time served, and he lets him go, and Ellie is free again. Eliahu Itzkovitz would pass away in 2015. And that's the story of Ellie the Avenger and the death of his family in 1941 in a concentration camp. May they rest in peace, and as always, stay safe out there in internet land.